Steve H. I'm a member of SAA, and I'm doing a presentation on moral inventory. But first, I'd like to do an opening prayer. God, grant what I say be of thy word, so others can be blessed for having heard. And grant that my path be thy chosen way, so those who hold my hand will not be led astray. And if you'd like to join me, we can make this plural. God, grant what we say be of thy word, so others can be blessed for having heard. And grant that our path be thy chosen way, so those who hold our hand will not be led astray. Okay, I say that prayer because who am I to present this to anybody? I don't have any special way of presenting this better than anyone else. And I don't represent any 12-step fellowship. I learned this information from someone else, and there are 40 other ways to do a moral inventory, if not more. I am a highly flawed individual. I require daily reprieve, sometimes hourly. I can't pray or do the steps any better than anyone else, but some days I have to do it more often. And I use the steps as a formula for prayer. So please do not shoot the messenger. Okay, so that's what I'm going to be talking about today. It's the Lost 12-Step Spiritual Tool. So in the AA Big Book on page 25, they discuss spiritual tools that were laid at our feet. And I'm saying moral inventory is one of those spiritual tools. However, this method has been lost over time. It wasn't written down. If it was, it's been edited out of the Big Book. What it is a daily moral inventory of liabilities and assets. It used to be in the rooms. There was this an old-fashioned thing called a window shade that you pull down and you set so that it blocks the sun from coming in the windows. You don't see those anymore. Well, in the meetings, they had the 12 steps on one of the shades, and then another shade you pull down had the 12 traditions, and a third shade had the moral inventory. So when I sat in meetings, I looked at the steps, I looked at the traditions. They didn't make a lot of sense. But when I looked at this moral inventory, I got an idea. Liabilities, assets, watch for, strive for. And it gave me an idea after looking at them for a while. That's what the steps are about. I'm trying to get rid of this old stuff and get this new stuff. So one of the reasons that we don't see this moral inventory anymore was originally the original program was a word of mouth program. They didn't have anything written down. And then they had 6 steps, and each person wrote that down differently. When the book was written, it was not written mostly to the alcoholics, but it was written in a higher language for publishers, financiers, stockholders, foundation board, the public, medical professionals, wives, employers. So it used a more sophisticated terminology. However, it ended up having a large volume of manuscript. And the editors had to decide what was to be printed and what was to be taken out. And over 400 pages were taken out of that original manuscript. I got that information from listening to Joe and Charlie, so you might have to check that out, fact check that a little bit. But over the years, some things are added and some things are lost. And if it's not written down, and even if they are written down, they get de-emphasized or they get highly emphasized. So I get this term spiritual tools from page 25 of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Let me read the whole thing and then go through it a little bit. But for the grace of God, there would have been thousands more convincing demonstrations So many want to stop but cannot. Sounds like our problem. There is a solution. Almost none of us like the leveling of pride, the self-searching, and the confession of shortcomings, and that would be to God and to another human being, which the process requires for its successful consummation. But we saw that it really worked in others, and we had come to believe in the hopelessness and futility of life as we had been living it. When therefore we were approached by those in whom the problem had been solved, there was nothing left for us but to pick up the simple kit of spiritual tools laid at our feet. We had found much of heaven, and we had been rocketed into the fourth dimension of existence, of which we had not even dreamed. The great fact is this, nothing less, that we have had deep and effective spiritual experiences, which have revolutionized our whole attitude toward life, toward our fellows, and toward God's universe. The central fact of our lives today is the absolute certainty that God has entered into our hearts and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. And He is commenced to accomplish those things for us which we could not do for ourselves. If you are seriously addicted as we were, we believe there is no middle of the road solution. We were in a position where life was becoming impossible. And if we had passed into the region from which there was no return through human aid, we had but two alternatives. One was to go on to the bitter end, blotting out the consciousness of our intolerable situation as best we could, and the other to accept moral and spiritual help from God and another spiritually awake human being. I added that last part. That's page 25, Alcoholics Anonymous. Then I highlighted it because I have a sponsor that likes me to highlight what I'm reading out of the Green Book, and I'm starting to enjoy that. So what stood out to me is it's the grace of God. But there is a solution, but for the grace of God. But none of us liked it. And what was it? This is the solution. The leveling of our pride, self-searching, and confession of shortcomings. And that again would be to God and to another human being. If we pick up the simple kit of spiritual tools, these are some of the things that will happen. We'll have effective spiritual experiences. They're telling us that God has entered their hearts and their lives, and in which a way is indeed miraculous. And He has commenced to accomplish things for them that they could never do by themselves. So they believe there is no middle of the road solution. And there is no return with just human aid. So we had to accept moral and spiritual help from God. So these are some things that I think are spiritual tools that are found when you work through the steps. The first one is total deflation of ego and self-sufficiency. That's found in step 1. And spiritual and moral recovery, which is the alternative. Another one is understanding and acknowledgement of a higher spiritual power. It's not a human power, or the meeting, or the sponsor, or a therapist. And it's found in the ABCs in the big book after they read the steps. And another tool would be belief and dependence upon a spiritual higher power. Meditation and prayer are spiritual tools. Then comes to the one I'm presenting today, spiritual and moral inventory. And there's acknowledgement and confession, spiritual restitution and amends, more about prayer and spiritual growth, spiritual maintenance and service. These are all different tools. Now, I have these pictures off to the right here because, yeah, I know how to use a hammer. No one had to ever show me how to use a hammer. I picked it up and you hit the nail. Unfortunately, even to today, I cannot drive a nail in straight. I will bend it, break it, and if I use the other side of it, the claw part, I will rip the wood and not do it well. Even if I get the nail all the way in, I'll damage the wood because no one showed me how to use a hammer. I never had anybody teach me how to hammer, and to this day, I don't know how to use that tool. So I got a longer story about a chainsaw, which I offered to help my neighbor trim his mesquite tree when I lived out in Arizona. And so I went to Home Depot and got a chainsaw. And needless to say, I didn't know what I was doing with that thing, and I got into a lot of difficulty with my neighbor, and I don't think we spoke after that, after what I did to his tree. But again, that was me, self-sufficiency, and not willing to let anybody teach me anything. Okay, so I told those two personal stories to give you an idea that you just can't pick up the tool and use it. If you want to use spiritual tools, you might need someone that knows how to use the tool and use the tool successfully and have them show you how to use these tools before you can learn how to work the 12 steps and get successful results. So as a student and being willing to learn, you have to have an open mind. And an open mind is not contempt prior to investigation. If we have a closed mind and we're not going to listen, then we'll stay in everlasting ignorance. That's a saying from the other fellowship. Contempt prior to investigation will keep a person in everlasting ignorance. And also, they say take what you like and leave the rest. Well, the smart thing would be to listen to the entire presentation first and not just take what you need during the presentation. Because if you don't listen, then your mind's made up, it's closed, and that's called prejudiced. And another useful tool, if you've been taught this before somewhere else, it's naturally, a human characteristic that we thought where we learned it the first time was the right way, and everybody else doesn't know what they're doing, and our mind's closed. And one of the slogans is look for the similarities and not the differences, and it'll help you comprehend more information than you knew previously. Another issue that should be discussed as a student of learning the 12 steps and learning how to use these spiritual tools is the slogan, keep it simple. And that can be misconstrued. When you learn something new, in order to become any good at it, it often takes years of study, practice, and application. It becomes simple after years of study and practice and application and not before. It's simple for a doctor, an engineer, or a rocket scientist because they did the work first. So, in order to learn or accomplish anything, you have to have a strong desire. At least that's what the books tell me. The success books or how to accomplish anything, the first principle is you have to have a strong desire because you got to face everything that comes up that looks like a distraction or a better desire that'll take you away from your goal. So your goal here is to have a spiritual awakening, learn how to apply the steps to solve your problems. You're going to need a strong desire to attend meetings, learn the steps with the sponsor, with diligent reading, study, and homework. Afterwards, it becomes simple, not before. So I guess there's a lot of different stories about the original two that developed this whole thing, Dr. Bob Smith and Bill Wilson. And I'm going to tell you my version. I read this information, and whether it's true or false, I'm trying to make a point. So most people know that Bill failed while he was out in Ohio trying to get a directorship job. Things didn't pan out well, got into a big battle. So he's in the Mayflower Hotel wanting to go into the bar to kind of soothe his feelings, but he knows what'll happen. So on the other side of the hotel is a list of ministers. He calls a bunch. He goes to a great extent, asking a bizarre question: where can I find another alcoholic to talk to? I guess that towards the end of the list. So he did get hold of somebody that was able to refer him to this Dr. Robert Smith. But unfortunately, he was drunk that day. But they did arrange for the next day to talk. So evidently, Bill Wilson, with that hope, didn't drink that night. White knuckled it or whatever he did, prayed all night. But they did meet, and Dr. Bob was hungover, didn't really want to go through with it. Bill said that, look, I'm not here to teach you anything. I need to talk to another alcoholic so that I can stay sober. So then Dr. Smith said, well, I could give you a few minutes of my time. And they hit it off. And Bill explained some stuff that he had learned from Dr. Silkworth about instead of approaching people with this spiritual hoopla and all that, tell them what you did. Tell them what your disease was like. Tell them everything that happened to you first. And then maybe they'll be willing to listen to what is working for you now. So they did work together. Now, Dr. Bob went out and got drunk for a while. And then he came back and then he worked it his way. He went out and made amends to a whole bunch of people. They hit it off. They chased some drunk around for a while, but then they found this attorney that they were able to help out, and they got things rolling in Akron, Ohio. And then Bill went back to New York and started stuff in New York. And the thing is that somewhere Bob, who was the sponsee, told his sponsor towards the end of his life, let's not louse this thing up, keep it simple. Now, neither of them were in charge of the other. The pamphlet says they met as equals. And Bill was there to exchange information. So I think that's what his job as a sponsor was. I have some information that may or may not be useful to you, but if I tell you what that information is, it will help me. And Bob worked with people. There's a story in their Alcoholics Anonymous. One afternoon he worked with a guy and they went through the steps. Then that guy moved off to Chicago and started meetings. It wasn't that he saw Dr. Bob again, but Dr. Bob worked with about 5,000 people in 15 years. Quite a feat. But Bill did not keep things simple. Bill developed meetings in New York, started groups, started a main office, created a foundation and a board. He wrote a book, or got help writing a book. He was financing the fellowship with selling car wax, selling stock to his book, even got some publicity through the Rockefellers. There were some news articles written that got it rolling. And then he wrote the 12 steps, and then the 12 traditions, and then the 12 concepts. And later on, he developed the Democratic Conference, and he developed corporate administration, World Service Office. He helped millions of people, and he still is. If he kept it simple, I don't think there'd be any 12-step organizations on today. It would have just died out, just like the Oxford groups disappeared. Okay, with this slide, there's a story about a man walking down the street, and he goes by a church, and on the marquee, it states, free trip to heaven, details inside. It arouses his curiosity, so he walks inside the church, and the pastor's in the office, and he tells the pastor, I'm interested in this free trip to heaven. Can you give me some more information? He says, oh, yeah, we can get you to heaven, but I don't know if I can get you in or not. Oh, says the guy. He says, well, you see, in order to get in, you have to have a desire to get in. He says, well, how do I get that? He says, well, I got a way to show you. It's called baptism. Well, what's baptism? Well, we got to put some swimming trunks on, and we'll go out back, and I'll put you under the water and you'll understand what baptism's all about, and you'll come out with a strong desire to go to heaven. Okay, I'm willing. So they go back, change, get their swim trunks on. It's a nice day. Walk out in the back in the pond, and they walk up to about their shoulders in the water, pretty deep. And the pastor says to the man, "You ready?" And he puts his hand on his shoulders and he pushes him under the water. And so the man goes underneath the water and he's looking up through the water. But the pastor still has his hands on the guy's shoulders. And he has a pretty firm grip. And he keeps looking up through the water. And all of a sudden, bubbles start coming out of his mouth. And he starts wondering, well, when's he going to let me back up? But he still feels a firm grip on his shoulders. So he starts to move around and struggle. And now the air's starting to leak out a little bit more out of his mouth. And it's getting to be a pretty strong need to get some air. And so he forcefully grabs the hands and struggles like with all his might and comes up out of the water and gasps for air. And the pastor's smiling. And the man looks at him curiously like, "What'd you do that for?" And the pastor says, "Well, what were you thinking down there?" He says, "I was thinking I wanted air." He says, "Well, when you want to go to heaven, as much as you wanted that air, you'll get in. They'll let you in. You have to have a very strong desire." So they ask me, and they ask a lot of people, "Are you willing to go to any length?" And it must be much stronger than your desire to act out. Now, your desire can be developed by the carrot or the stick. The gift of desperation, the absolute hell of this addiction, will give you the desire to find this program and do whatever they ask of you, because you do not want to go back. It was the worst hell in your life. And that's a gift. You never want to forget that place, so that you're always motivated and you have a strong desire to stay away from it. And then as you work this program and you learn some stuff, you start gaining the rewards. You start getting the carrot. And that becomes the substitute for acting out. That used to be your reward. Now spiritual rewards feel a lot better. So I hope I'm not losing you. I got some pretty long stories here, and I got one more. But just hold your horses. We'll get to the moral inventory part. This is the parable of the piece of cloth. Let me read it to you and then emphasize a few things. The blessed one then spoke as follows. If a soiled and dirty piece of cloth is dipped by the fuller in any dye at all, blue, yellow, red, or pink, it still will be of bad and dirty color. Why? Because the cloth is not clean. Even so, when the mind is impure, a bad future must be expected. If a perfectly clean cloth is dipped by the fuller in any dye at all, blue, yellow, red, or pink, it will be of beautiful, clean color. Why? Because the cloth is clean. Even so, when the mind is pure, a good future life must be expected. Now, what are the mind's impurities? Well, he uses cupidity, which is excessive desire or lust, is an impurity of the mind. And here's some more. Enmity, anger, rancor, hypocrisy, malice, jealousy, avarice, trickery, deceit, stubbornness, haughtiness, pride, arrogance, and so forth are also impurities of the mind. He who recognizes that lust as an impurity of the mind abandons it. He who recognizes that enmity, anger, rancor, hypocrisy, malice, jealousy, avarice, trickery, deceit, obduracy, haughtiness, pride, arrogance, inflation, indolence, and so forth are as impurities of the mind abandons them. When that man has abandoned lust, cupidity, recognizing it as an impurity of the mind, and when he has abandoned all the impurities of the mind, he finds serene joy, satisfaction with his life. That man has learned that virtue is its own reward. He is touched with a feeling for the truth, and he receives the gladness associated with truth. When one is glad, joy arises. When the mind is joyful, the body becomes relaxed. When relaxed, one feels content. So, I'm sure you got the gist of the story. There's these big words in here: enmity, anger, rancor, hypocrisy, malice, and so forth. And they're all impurities of the mind. I don't know what half of them are. I would have to look each one up in a dictionary. But that's not what I'm going to tell you to do. I'm going to tell you to look up each one of these words in a thesaurus and see all the similar words to enmity, all the similar words to anger and rancor, and try to get your own interpretation by expanding that word to things that make sense to you. Okay, so now I'm getting closer to the inventory. The last thing was actually an inventory, is to find these negative things within you. Um, they use a word now, taking stock, which is just a synonym for taking inventory. I use an older language because I'm older, but inventory was part of my language. Um, and these were some of the things that were in the other book that talked about inventory. They said a business that doesn't take inventory goes bankrupt. They go broke. But also, a business that takes inventory and doesn't take any corrective action will also go broke, because they got the record of everything that's wrong with them, but they never did anything about it. So a moral debit inventory and confession ad infinitum will not achieve sanity or spiritual awakening. They're only tools within the steps. You have to learn how to do those, but there's a lot of other things you have to blend in to make the pie. You got to turn the oven on and you got to put it in there. But as your morals improve, so does the quality of your life. So, if I'm going to teach you about moral inventory, naturally there's going to be some definitions. How often do we look up the word moral? But it's concerned with principles of right and wrong behavior. Then what's amoral? Well, lacking or ignorant of moral sense and principles. That applied to most of my life. I didn't grow up learning morals. Well, I learned them from TV and movies and the way my parents behaved, but it was pretty much ignorant. Now, immoral is someone that knows the principles of right and wrong, but they ignore them for their own personal gain, probably. So, what's a moral inventory? It's a reckoning and an accounting of personal principles for right and wrong behavior. So what would be the opposite of that would be unaccountable. That would be irresponsible, misguided management, planning and action, and someone who doesn't take inventory. And then spiritually bankrupt, as opposed to bankrupt, would be that solitary, incomprehensible demoralization. Now, there are many, many other inventory tools and other types of inventory. I'm going to discuss just moral inventory, and I'm getting that information out of the AA Big Book. They also have instructions on how to do a resentment inventory. There's a fear inventory, a sexual conduct inventory, and then I add a higher power inventory to choose what kind of higher power you want. And then our green book has a few too: harm inventory, conflict inventory, emotional inventory, loneliness inventory, embarrassment inventory, shame inventory, self-hatred inventory. Let me talk about a few of these to give you an idea of what the inventory is. The easiest one in the AA Big Book, I think it's page 68, it says now about fear, and we put it on paper. Inventory you do on paper. You have a ledger and you keep statistics and measurements and you know which is the good and the bad. So it says we write our fears on paper. So how do you do that? Well, did it this way. I wrote I am afraid of. And then I made a list of things because I wasn't telling anybody else. I was making the list to me, to the I own self be true. I was doing an inventory of what's inside of me. So I wrote down all kinds of things. Some of them were silly. I'm afraid to be alone and I'm afraid to be around people. Something needs to be done there because you're not going to get anywhere with that kind of stuff. But I didn't know it was in my head because I only thought one or the other, but not both at the same time. And I also learned that there are some good fears that I don't want to get rid of. And there are some fears that I do want to get rid of. But it goes on to say that self-sufficiency failed, that we can't get rid of our fear. We're not strong enough to do it. And then it goes on to say that we depend upon God to do this. There's some very, very good writing in that part of the book. I didn't put it in here because I'm getting pretty long, but I would recommend reading that page. We never apologize for believing in God. Men of courage throughout the ages profess that they believe in God, you know. So I'm transposing that a little bit, but I would recommend you read that whole page. Uh, so that's a brief thing on it. The higher power inventory is pretty easy. It was another story. Here we go. Uh, a man tells a pastor or a preacher, I don't believe in God. And so the preacher says, oh, well, tell me about this God you don't believe in. And the guy goes on for about an hour, you know, I don't believe in this and that. And then the preacher says, well, I don't believe in that kind of God either. Well, that story helped me realize that, you know, I got to list what kind of God I want, what I want God to be and what I don't want God to be. You know, there's certain basic questions. Either God is or he isn't. Well, I really don't have any choice. If I'm going to do the 12 steps, I don't want to try it without God. I'm going to choose God for my benefit. And then I got to determine what type of God is this? What God qualities do I want? Well, it turns out to be the same as my moral inventory. I want all the assets that God has. And I don't want God to have all these human characteristics or any defects of character. So that's how I did my inventory. I'm just giving you the example of how these inventories work. And I can't help you out much with the green book, but it would, to me, be a similar thing. You write down your emotions and you decide which ones are the good emotions and which ones are the bad ones. And you ask your higher power to remove the bad ones and enhance the good ones. Same with loneliness. Which kind of loneliness is bad and which is good? You know, which kind of certain embarrassment is necessary. We have to have a conscience. You know, it should be embarrassed about certain things, but some of it is overdone. And by doing the inventory, now we know how to set up a corrective action plan, and we got the power to do it. We have a higher power to take these shortcomings and turn them into assets. Okay, so again, this is what the moral inventory looked like when I was on the wall. But I don't think it's an inventory. I think they got the ledger up there, but the work wasn't done. There's no measurements. It's giving you the idea you don't want the liabilities, you want the assets. But can we ever get to 100%? I don't know. I can only speak for myself. And I'm a work in progress. I got to do this. I get a daily reprieve if I do a lot of work. And otherwise, I'm going to sink to the bottom. Okay, again, that big book, the first one, was written with some very fancy sounding words to reach a public of professional people that could help finance and support this thing. So they used a thesaurus, and then I'm basically reverse engineering it. When they say, if we are painstaking about this phase of our development, they went to the thesaurus. They were too tired of using the word thorough. So they said painstaking. It had a lot more emphasis to it. But if you say, if we were thorough about this phase of our development, it means the same thing. And there are a lot of those words in our big book and our 12 steps. They got harm, injure, wrongs. So some of the debits, I take one word and then I find several others in a thesaurus. Some harm, injure, wrongs, defects, shortcomings, powerless, unmanageable, hopeless. And then like egocentric means the same thing as self-sufficient. And then the credits, they're called antonyms and synonyms. Now the opposite of the debits would be the antonyms. But the credits, when they say amend, you could say recover, restore. When they say morals, they can say assets and credits. When we say sanity, we can say spiritually awake, joyous. They don't exactly mean the same thing, but they're similar meaning words. And they help me more than a dictionary definition. And sometimes the definitions have like 8 or 9 different things. So if I choose one and you choose definition 7, we still don't know what we're talking about. Okay, so before the year 2000, I had a difficult time selling this thesaurus idea to anybody. It was just like a dictionary, you know. Who's going to go to the bookstore, buy a thesaurus, and look this stuff up? But now, the new way, there's no excuse. We can fact check everything, but I use Google all the time to look up other words. It doesn't take long. There's all kinds of thesaurus that will provide the synonyms and the antonyms, and it helps me understand the word a lot better than looking it up in a dictionary. So I'm not an accountant, so I'm sure this is real simple, because there are probably many, many ways to learn how to do an inventory. But this one is just 4 columns: assets versus debits, and then measurements. I'm going to use percentages in the moral inventory that I'm going to show you. But the units can be quantities or sizes or number of things you have. And the assets are the credits, the good traits, the virtues, the blessings. And the debits are the liabilities, the bad traits, the defects, the deficits. So again, I used a thesaurus to come up with some of this stuff. There's 2 different ways you can set up your ledger. You can look up moral assets like honest, unselfish, courage, forgiving. And you can look up synonyms for those, like righteous, honorable, moral for honest, and altruistic, egoless, service, compassionate for unselfish. It expands your idea of what these words mean. And then you put the moral asset on one side, and to do the debits, you could just use the thesaurus and look up the antonyms. So the opposite of honest would be dishonest, or morally ignorant, cunning, immoral. When you get to unselfish, its antonym would be selfish, egotistical, self-seeking, narcissistic. Courage, the opposite, fearful. So you're putting the asset on one side and you're putting the opposite on the other side. Is it always, you're going to get 100%? I don't think so. But this is one way to do it. I'm going to just show you on the next slide another way. Now you can also set up your ledger from the moral debit words first. A lot of books nowadays, they're good about telling you what's wrong with you, but they don't leave you a way out. They spend chapter after chapter. We identify, yeah, I got this, I got that. But we don't have 100% of these negative debits. We have some of it. We need to do an inventory to see how much of it's in our life. And we do have good stuff about us too. And the inventory shows that good stuff. But setting up your ledger this way, usually I recommend you do a few of the credits and do the antonyms, and then set up a few of the debits. Like they used to always talk about the 7 deadly sins, but I never knew what the opposite was. So now I know I want them to remove the lust and replace it with abstinence or virtue. So some synonyms for lust is gluttony, greed, immorality. It's a wider use of that word, but it expands our consciousness about that word. And pride, self-righteous, self-sufficient, indignant, envy, self-pity, victimization. And then you put those debits down, then you go use the thesaurus and you look up the antonyms, and you'll get virtue, moral, decent. You put that opposite, gluttony, greed, immorality, and you start taking some measurements. But these were doing it the reverse way. You can go use the thesaurus, get synonyms for the moral debit, and then look up some antonyms and set up your ledger. So here's what your ledger is going to look like. It's a simple version, but you don't want to start off making it too big. You want something manageable. So you got your moral credits on one side and your moral debits on the opposite side. There are two opposite qualities. I don't think we're ever going to be 100% honest, and we never were 100% dishonest either. Likewise with humility and selfishness. So I got this percentage. You can do it over a period of time, like last week, or during your addiction, or pick a period of time, and then ask yourself over that period of time, how honest was I during that time, and how dishonest. This is highly subjective, but it's an inventory for you to look at. And this is what it looks like before you make any measurements. But you got to make measurements for it to be an inventory. How manageable was my life? Well, during the addiction, maybe about 20%. I was a workaholic. I raised a kid. How unmanageable was it? Well, I like to exaggerate it. It was horrible. But, there was some unmanageability, some manageability. I got to ask myself, what's realistic? So here's an inventory. Let's say I did it last week. And I'm just being honest with myself. It's for my eyes only, or for your eyes only. This isn't what you're going to be sharing with anybody until you got a good feeling about it. Then you go talk to a sponsor and ask them to look at your values and see how close you are to being realistic. They might be able to say, hey, you're a lot more honest than you're giving yourself credit for, or vice versa. But, it's subjective. Let's say, and I'm 75% honest, but especially with myself, I'm still pretty much dishonest. So these are the measurements I made. Humble. I'm still selfish. That's how I would rate myself. Sometimes 50-50 is a big improvement over, like, at one time. Now, I guess this wasn't last week. At one time, I was only sane about 20% of the time, and 80% of the time I had pretty much unhealthy behavior, thinking, and emotions. Yes, and this is another way to use your inventory after you did it. You can focus on certain things. You can't fix everything at once. You can say prayers for all of that stuff, and but some of them you got to focus on. If you got 70% self-pity and your gratitude is pretty low, well, they got other tools, gratitude lists, affirmations, lots of stuff that you can start working on that. Uh, Again, unhealthy thinking, emotions, and behavior, if it's that high, getting some help, whether it's a therapist or uh, putting some time and energy into this recovery program to make some changes is important. And naturally, you can't do it by yourself. You need a higher power. But this will help you focus on some of the worst ones first, the ones that are really causing you problems. And then you can work on others as time goes and as they improve. Yes, and this is another way you can use your inventory tool. You can measure progress or regression. You did an inventory last month, and now I don't know how you can do it daily. It just is a large order. But to have the tool when you need it, you're starting to feel unhappy, you're starting to have too much temptation. You get the inventory out, you look at last month, and you say, well, I had it at 80%, and or let's say I had sanity at a high level, and now it's dropping. Oh, well, I better get busy. What am I doing wrong? But likewise, it'll show you progress too. Last month I was doing horrible, but I started going to meetings. I did the 90-90. I started reading out of this green book and doing some of the stuff it's asking me to do. And now I'm about 60% sane. I still have a struggle, but by being able to measure this and compare it, you can feel a whole lot better with the progress you're making. You have to climb the mountain to appreciate the view, but you got to stop and appreciate the view. You can't just keep climbing away without knowing that you're making some progress and appreciate that progress. Yeah, and after you've done this for a while, you know how to set them up. You can change the words around and look at different aspects, but you got the tool, you know how to use the tool. And then you'll start looking at some of these words a little bit differently too, like, wait a minute, don't I want to put guilt, shame, remorse, blame on the debit side? I don't really want to have that, and not in 100% all the time, maybe a little guilt, but what's the opposite of those? And maybe I can ask God, my higher power, to remove some of this guilt and shame and give me something on on the good side of it. I'd have to go to the thesaurus and find out what the opposite of some of these things are, because I know the bad ones, but it's difficult for me to think of the good ones. And likewise, I always thought, like, go to high school or in the military, pride, ambition, workaholic, ego, self-sufficiency, those were all good things. But now that I'm learning more in this program, there's a negative side to a lot of this stuff. So I can put it on the debit side and find out how to correct some of these things, what I should be praying for, remove some of this arrogance, know-it-all, intellectual pride. I got that in spades. It keeps me in everlasting ignorance. I don't want to listen to this guy, because I'm smarter than he is. And all that trouble. I need my inventory to point that out because I lie to myself. I forget I'm doing this. Okay, so again, you cannot just do a moral inventory and expect yourself to be restored to sanity. It's a tool. It's part of the step process. It's a process. You just can't do one part of baking the pie, like grease the pan, now where's the pie? There's lots of things to do besides moral inventory. But the moral inventory teaches us how to do some of these other steps, what we want removed, and not just removed, what we don't want to avoid, what do we want it replaced with? And we ask God to remove the debits then and replace it with the assets. Uh, it shows us that alone we can't make these changes. And we're not going to get really, really far. These steps will make a saint out of somebody, but it'll take a long time. They are designed to make you a saint, but we got some work to do. I can't go to 100% honest if I'm 35% honest. I need to go to 40% or 50, and that takes a lot of work sometimes. So I pray for desire, the willingness, and the power to change. Sometimes I do it ahead of time. Sometimes I'm in pain and I'm suffering from my defects of character. And that's the desperation is motivating me to get out my inventory and then do more than just the inventory. But, and it shows us specifically what to pray for, but our dependence has to be upon God to make these changes. I can't make myself any of these things. So I went through some of the SAA literature, and I found a lot of moral defects. I didn't find their antonym, the assets, but I wrote them down. I used the thesaurus and wrote them down. Like on page 31, there was an unmanageable sex activities. Well, I would put that on one side, the debit, but what are my wholesome and manageable sex activities? And they had mistaken beliefs versus sound beliefs, self-centered versus service. Again, all these pages listed a bunch of defects that we could do a moral inventory for. Blame, manipulation, victimized, anger. But I had to look up the opposite. Grudges versus forgiveness. Selfishness versus serving. Lack of humility versus humble. How much do I have of these things? You know, I'm not 100% unhumble. I'm not 100% humble. But I got both of them, and sometimes they flare up. So the moral inventory can get me through some of these things. Okay, I see this is getting long. I probably should have left this one out. I was just playing around with serenity prayer because, you know, some prayers we ask to remove and some prayers we ask for the asset. You know, grant me the serenity, grant me the courage, grant me the wisdom. So doing the moral inventory, I rewrote this serenity prayer a little bit. God, remove my insanity and grant me serenity. You know, the insanity is the debit and the serenity is the asset. Remove my resistance and grant me acceptance. Remove my fear, grant me courage. Remove my powerlessness and grant me the power to change. So, you know, I'm overemphasizing this, playing around a little bit. I'm hoping that I'm on a serious note, you know, that I'm emphasizing that not only do we want God to grant us things, but we also want Him to remove certain things. Likewise, in the other step where we ask Him to remove these defects of character, we also want Him to grant us the opposite, the good ones. Okay, I guess I'm stretching it a little bit, but with amends, there are a lot of ways to look at this. And the point I'm making with this slide is that when we ask God to remove the debit and replace it with the asset, you know, take away this resentment and replace it with a kindly view, a loving view of this person, and it actually happens, I think that's the amend. Now, you can define amend with some religious terminology as restitution, expiation, atonement. But if you go in the dictionary for as a verb, an action word, you know, make better, to improve, or progress. It's a softer version of it, but that's what we're learning to do by using the thesaurus, is finding words that make sense to us, that aren't so strong and stringent. So I took another course about miracles. It was called A Course in Miracles. I didn't stay with it. I took it once, you know, but the miracle, they said, is using prayer to a higher spiritual power and then being restored from insanity to sanity. Sounded familiar. It's going from spiritually asleep to spiritually awake, from resentment to forgiveness. And some of the words I got from the other AA book is forgiveness is patience, tolerance, compassion, and a kindly view. Or when I'm going, asking this higher power to take me from the moral defect to the moral asset. When that occurs, they're calling that a miracle. God stepped in and took you from the negative and placed you into the positive. And they said there's no order of magnitude. You can do that all day long. You can have 100 miracles. Every time you're not thinking well and you become aware, oh, I'm feeling horrible. And you work this step process and you're asking God to remove it. And then later on, you're feeling happy, joyous, and free. Well, you experienced a miracle according to this definition. I'm sure there's a lot of other definitions. I'm manipulating this to make a point. Uh, Improvements to your moral inventory asset. When you're going from like 10% sane in your addiction, and now you're into recovery and you're 90% sane, that's a miracle. I couldn't get out of my addiction. That was a miracle just to get abstinence, an absolute miracle. And then I felt horrible. And by doing the work, I'm starting to feel good. So it's also, you can set up a corrective action point. I'm sorry, getting long. Corrective action plan. So you did your work, you found out some of the major defects. From this point on, how am I going to make things morally and spiritually better for me and for others? It's not as strict. You just keep moving slowly, progressing with the help of your higher power. Okay, so now, after you have done a bunch of these by yourself, and you start feeling comfortable with it and see the advantage of it, um, then you can take it to someone else, someone trustworthy, naturally, sponsor, or, there's other people that you could take it to that you would trust and show them the basic general stuff that you're doing with this inventory. You notice that you have higher percentages of this debit than the positive, or you notice that you have some good qualities here. But review it with someone else, because there's this axiom: you are what you think you are, but you are also what other people think you are. And it's very difficult for us in our little world to figure out how other people see us unless we ask and listen to what they have to say. So it might be a good idea to check your findings out with somebody. I gave you a few examples earlier. They might tell you have more of the asset than you're giving yourself credit for. Or they might point something out that you have a mental block to, that everybody else can see. And it's not going to feel good, but once you hear it with time, you can start looking at it with more courage and start digesting some of these big chunks of truth that are necessary, that we have to accept and do something about, or we stay in our everlasting ignorance and we stay suffering. Ignorance isn't bliss. Okay, so again, my point was that this is just one spiritual tool, and there's lots of different types of inventories. I'm showing you a moral inventory. Where does this fit in the entire process, the entire step process? Because you have to learn the entire process to get the objective of it, or the reward, or the goal, which is spiritual awakening, being restored to sanity, being happy, joyous, and free, how to solve your problems. So some of the other stuff is like when you're doing step 1, 2, or spent 40 years deflating your ego, you have to reach a point where, that's enough. I can't do it anymore. That's called ego deflation. And that's step 1. And then going from there to the acknowledgement that self-sufficiency has failed. We have to get to that point. And I don't think it's just in the addiction. Self-sufficiency in life doesn't work too good. And you can do further study on that. I'm not going to express that at this time. But then you have to develop a willingness to try a higher spiritual power. That might take a little bit. And design your own concept of what you want God to be. So you make 2 lists, what God is and what God isn't, so that you have it clear in your head who you're praying to. I prayed to my ego for years, thinking it was God, asking it to get me a new car or a new girlfriend. And he did, but it was horrible results. I was never satisfied. Um, you're asking God for the desire and power to abstain and manage your life sanely, and then you're conducting a moral inventory, and you're learning a little bit more advanced stuff of how these negative things are hurting you and why you want the positive. And you're going to have to learn a lot more about meditation and prayer. Sometimes it's in our program, sometimes you might have to go out. And then measurement is very important. If you're going to pray, see if it works. And when you forget to pray, write down the results of what happened then. It convinces you. So there's other inventories, including sexual conduct, and then you go on to the next, and you go on to the next, and you look for the results. And you keep good track of measurements. Okay, now I'm going to throw in this fancy word, algorithm. Hope I don't lose the audience in the process. But an algorithm is a stepwise procedure, a formula, a recipe, used to gain the desired and consistent results. For instance, a recipe is an algorithm. To bake a pie, sometimes in your glove compartment in your car, it has directions how to change a tire. You want to follow the sequence, or your car is going to fall off the jack, or you're going to strip a lug nut. There's a lot of things if you don't follow the instructions. Actually, to do longhand division, which we probably learned in 3rd and 4th grade, rhythm to do that. And if I'm going to buy a table online, they're going to send me a box with a bunch of parts in it. And I got to get out the directions, and I follow that algorithm. It's quite extensive. It has subparts to step 1, subparts to step 2, all the way down through till I get the table put together. That's what I'm saying the 12 steps are, an algorithm. And you must do all the steps within a reasonable period of time to get the finished product. You can't stop in the middle and say, well, I'm working on step 4. No, you're learning step 4. But to work step 4, you work it within the algorithm. You do all parts of it to get to the end result. And this is my opinion now, because I'm sure I might step on some toes, but for me, I can't leave out desired ingredients or make substitutions. So if it says God, as you understand God, or another human being, or it says prayer, or meditation, or moral inventory, I can't say I don't want to do that part because I got too much intellectual pride to allow me to do that. You can do whatever you want, I suppose, but you're not following the algorithm anymore. You're not following the stepwise process. So you can't really expect to have the results that are supposed to happen from doing the stepwise process. So with that being said, here are some of what I think are the most important quotes found in the Green Book. When you finish step 1 on page 25, it says, "We are ready for step 2." And when you finish step 2 on page 28, it says, "We are ready for step 3." Then so on and so forth. Step 3, page 31, we move on to step 4. By now you got the point. I go all the way down through here. Someone put that in there. I like it. It means in the other book, it does the same thing. It didn't do it exactly like this, but says, don't wait. Move on. Keep going. Learn the whole process, not just 1 or 2 parts of it, and repeat those 2 parts and expect you're going to get a pie. So what if there was a machine that could put your problem in one end and out the other end, the problem's solved? Well, that's what I'm saying the steps are. It's a problem-solving machine. You go from spiritually asleep to spiritually awake. You go from insane to sane. It has a power source. You don't even have to pay the power source. It has all these things. The problem is it takes a lot to learn how to work the machine. And it takes someone that knows how to work the machine to teach you all the parts, all the moving parts. Just like it took you to learn to drive a car. You think nothing of it now, it's simple. But when you were 17 and going to driver's ed and you had to go out in the car, it wasn't that simple. And there are many, many, many other things in your lifetime, from maybe playing baseball and learning how to throw a ball till you got any good at it. So the purpose of working the steps is to achieve a spiritual awakening. If you've never had one, you don't know what it's like. So you got to go on faith. That's something valuable. You're familiar with insanity, maybe not sanity, but the purpose of working through the steps is to restore yourself to sanity, to make your life more manageable, to solve your problems, to improve your moral and spiritual character. Well, what benefit is that? Well, when you improve your moral and spiritual character, you attract much better things in your life, relationships, and many, many more things. And we're either eternal or we're not eternal. But I'm betting we are. And if I improve my moral, spiritual character, I'm changing my eternity, the quality of my eternity. So, and then working the steps in the process of our present life, it'll provide a joyous life experience, which is something that's worth its while just on that alone. So, learning how to work the steps takes time, but it also requires a book, class, and an instructor. It requires reading, discussion, study, and homework. It requires willingness, persistence, and practice. It requires conscious contact with a higher spiritual power, and it'll teach you how to pray and what to ask for. These are just a few things that's required if you want to ever become proficient at working the steps throughout your day and changing your state of mind and the quality of your life. Okay, I know I'm running long and I'm repeating myself, but I think this is worth repeating. Now, a miracle, according to my definition, is going from an egocentric, troubled mind to an awakened spiritual mind. And you can have as many miracles as you want per day. There's no order of magnitude. Using the 12 steps to solve your problems, you can move yourself with the help of a higher spiritual power and another trustworthy human being from being spiritually asleep to spiritually awake. And that is a miracle. Look at the progress you made thus far. That's a miracle. Compared to how much progress you made under your own self-sufficiency. Well, I can only speak for myself. Self-sufficiency failed. Okay, we're at basically the end of this slideshow. What I put in here is a closing meditation and a prayer. Not everybody's into meditation and prayer, especially guided meditation. Familiar with? So you can read through it. I just using a formula that they use for the Lord's Prayer. But again, I'm going to do a guided meditation for those that are interested in it, and those that aren't, you could probably stop the slideshow here, and you got the gist of it. For those that do want to do this part of it, if you're watching at home, just get yourself in a comfortable position. There's all different poses for meditation, whether you're laying down, sitting up, or cross-legged and all that. Just get yourself comfortable. I'll explain some of this stuff a little bit. guided meditation. There are many. I'm just using something that I learned where you just use your left hand, and for each digit is a process of going into a relaxed state. Your body's relaxed, but your mind's alert. The first digit would be to just unify with your surroundings, because this type of meditation supposedly can be done anywhere. It doesn't have to be in a specific environment. You just unify with the noises, the sounds, any interruptions, and just allow your awareness to take you into a deeper state. It's all voluntary. If people that are familiar with this, they know they're safe, but you do it to yourself basically. The guider facilitates it, gives you images you can use. So you unify, and then the next digit would be to relax your body, and they suggest how to do that. I'm going to do this very fast, so it's not going to be in depth. But then after you unify your body, then it's your mental thought, your emotions that you want to relax, and then you go into your subconscious mind, and that's mostly imagery of picturing like clouds floating across the sky or a stream going across a meadow. And then supposedly you're into your super conscious state of mind, which is supposed to be an egoless state of mind. Now, naturally, for the first time, you may not achieve any of this, but you may become familiar with the procedure. And it's the concept is you go into a guided meditation first to get rid of your ego and your conscious thinking and your chatter, so that you're very relaxed but alert. So when the prayer's read, you could open your eyes and read the prayer too. Or if you read through this prayer and you're not offended in any way, shape, or form, I can read through the prayer, and then after the prayer, we do 5 different things on our other hand to bring us back up through all of those levels, back into your normal conscious state of mind. Meditation is altering the brain waves from a beta to an alpha to a delta theta type state, and then coming back up. You want to be alert when you leave. You don't want to still be in a trance. But the whole concept is you do the meditation, then you do the prayer, and the ideology is that you're praying directly to your higher power in a form that is not interrupted by just this material life. And I won't go into any more depth that. It's a pretty loose explanation, but now I will start the meditation, which is, again, unifying in the room you're in with any noises, sounds. You can have a nice little meditation room where you got candles and all that, but it doesn't have to be that. You can do it in a work environment. Even if people come and go around you, you can kind of leave your eyes open and go into this state. It's suggested you close your eyes, but it's just using your internal voice to tell you to relax your feet and relax your legs and calves and your thighs and your waist and your buttocks, and you relax your core body. You do the exterior first, the muscles and the skeletal structures and your shoulders and your rib cage, and you can go under your arms, down your arms to your fingertips and relax all of that, the outer skin area and muscles, the skeletal into the neck, the spine, into the jaw, into the maxilla upper part, around your nose, around your ears, your eyes, your forehead, the top of your scalp, back of your head. It's just imagery, of relaxing yourself, and then feel it. You do it with your mind. You try to feel like relaxed. You make yourself feel relaxed, and then you can spend a lot more time into this, but I'll just go on into the mental type imagery, where for instance, all your sensory units, you can turn them off.
You're not going to, even with your eyes open, you're just not going to use your vision for anything severely concentrated. You're just going to stare. Uh, you can notice the sounds, but you're not going to concentrate. You're not going into a deep, focused state of mind. Your smell, sometimes it relaxes you if there's certain things, or you can imagine smells of roses or um, other sweet smelling things, things that you enjoy. Same with taste. You can imagine tastes. Um, but it's a part of slowing down your mental awareness and not taxing it so much. It's not going to stop. And we're not trying to achieve any other really wild state of mind. We're just relaxing and slowing down the physiological, the mental, the emotions. We're trying to let them quiet down. There's nothing going to be traumatic. You're not going to be thinking about something that triggers emotions. You're just going to be in the moment for now. And then the subconscious mind is again like your thoughts are clouds floating across a nice blue sky or a beautiful sunrise, or you're down at the beach and the water's crashing, the waves are crashing. You can smell maybe seaweed or salt air, and the whole imagery process is what's relaxing your subconscious mind. And then you go into your belief system of what you think your higher spiritual power is on a personal basis. You're going right into that. And that's where you pray for, like, this whole moral inventory stuff we were doing. Dear Father, dear God, your higher spiritual power, whatever names you give to it, would you please give me the power to manage my life sanely? Um, would you help me with these issues I have of having too much self pity or too much guilt? And can you assist me into going into these new areas of confidence and new areas of joy? And especially help me with the abstinence. I never want to go back there again. I don't need that. I want to stay in the sunlight of your spirit. Whatever words come to your mind, it's not that it stops your thinking, it just calms it all down. And so at this point, then, this is where I'm going to read this prayer. And again, I fashioned it after the Lord's Prayer. There's a lot of stuff about formula to prayer. And this is one formula. God, who is the supreme joy of eternity, we praise you. May your realm come to earth. May your loving intent be done on earth as it is where you are. In meditation and prayer, we ask you to give us each day the desire and power to manage our lives morally, spiritually, and sanely. Help us to remove our moral defects and replace them with your spiritual quality. Forgive us our resentments as we have forgiven those we resent. Lead us away from temptation and deliver us from addiction. Amend our heart and those we have harmed with forgiveness, patience, tolerance, compassion, and kindness. Awaken us morally and spiritually so that we can carry and provide service for the SAA message to all who may want or need our information. And help and guide us to maintain our conscious contact with your kind will and way of life in all of our life, now and forever. Amen. And that was the simple prayer. Then we bring you back to your normal waking consciousness. And you want to come back up and bring all that joy, all that love that you just experienced in your superconscious mind, bring that into the subconscious and clean out the area. Bring light in there and clean out all the negative that's been stowed away there. Just let that light flow in through the subconscious and let it come into your conscious mind. So you're thinking affirmations, and so you're feeling affirmations, and you're thinking joy, and you're thinking recovery and progress, and you're appreciating the view, little things. And it comes to you naturally now. And you keep coming back up with a smile on your face and your eyes gleaming. and you come back into your normal waking consciousness, being alert, but at a higher level where you're joyous, you know you're on the right path, and you know you're connected. You know you're connected to your higher spiritual power. And then to close it out, you just make a statement so that you make sure you're in the room and you're not in a trance. And a lot of times it's just stated like I am in control or I am awake. Say something to that effect to yourself so that you acknowledge now you're back into your normal waking state. And that was a real brief meditation and prayer, but I could give a whole class on this, but I just wanted to give you a little taste to get the idea. I'm sure it'll stick with you. So again, I'm Steve H, and I'd like to thank you for letting me make this presentation to you all. I hope the ideas of moral inventory are useful. I didn't break it down into a workshop or anything like that, but you can review this presentation and stop it at any point to practice these things. It'll take a while to figure it out, and then you can convert it into things that work for you better. This is just the floor plan, and you can add on to it and change to it to make it work for yourself. But these were just the information and the ideas I wanted to present. And then let me close this out with one of my favorite poems. It's called There's a Special Art to Living. There is a special art to living, and you need a frame of mind that can overlook the showers till the sun begins to shine. There is a special art to living, and you have to understand that things don't always function in the way that they were planned. There's a special art to living, and the challenge must be met. And the longer that you try it, the better you will get. Don't be caught waiting for the world to come to you. You have to climb the mountain to appreciate the view. Thank you very much.